wonderful speakers lined up who will talk for about 10 minutes each, describing their experiences as a training organisation in the traditional sailing sector. As you've probably just heard, we are going to be recording this session so that we can share a link afterwards with anyone who wasn't able to attend. And we'd ask that you please keep your microphones muted and your cameras switched off during the speaker presentations so that we can avoid any disruption. There is a chat function at the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to introduce yourselves, share your comments and post questions for any of our speakers. And we'll be taking these questions at the end after all our speakers have presented. Finally, this is a live event, and although we certainly hope not to have any technical difficulties, please do bear with us if we encounter any problems. Next slide, please. Before we move to our speakers, I just wanted to first set this session in context. It's part of our Heritage Lottery funded training scheme, the Shtp Heritage Training Partnership, which has run 2 projects back to back since 2014. We focus particularly in this project on the skills around operating, maintaining and conserving historic vessels. Next slide, please. The Shtp project cost almost £700,000 in total, and we've seen 26 trainees aged between 18 and 30 undertake a 12-month-long placement. Our most recent cohorts on the scheme have been able to choose between either a traditional seamanship or a museum shipkeeping route, and have been placed with one of 9 partner organisations to learn this knowledge in practical workplace settings. The placements have also included a specialist course in historic vessel maintenance at the International Boatbuilding and Training College in Lowestoft, and a series of masterclasses, as well as professional development through a mix of external courses. Next slide, please. So why did we set up Shtp? Why did we feel it was needed for the sector? Well, back in 2013, when the project was first under discussion, we knew that we needed to address a growing gap in traditional skills. Historic vessels were having problems with the lack of skilled crew, and particularly an ageing workforce, which was causing difficulties in succession planning. There was no established course for historic vessel maintenance, and as a result, there was a risk that we could end up with a deterioration in vessel condition, as well as craft being sailed inefficiently, simply because the knowledge was no longer there. And in vessel owning museums, there was also a growing lack of staff with the opportunity to gain practical experience on board a historic vessel. Next slide, please. So Shtp2 deliberately partnered with organisations whose vessels featured 3 different types of traditional rig: gaff, lug and sprit. And we organised rotations so that trainees had a chance to have some time with each, and also networking events so that partners got to learn about each other's organisations. Next slide, please. And we're now reaching the end of this project. We're proud to have created a pool of knowledgeable young people, 22 of whom are now working or volunteering in the sector. Our partners have developed experience in hosting traineeships and sharing knowledge, which they're continuing to apply elsewhere in their organisations. And because of Shtp, there is a closer dialogue between vessels of different types. There are more individuals with knowledge of specialist rigs and a consequent sharing of crew. And as part of the project legacy, we've developed a training framework, which we hope will bring a more consistent standard to the ways in which knowledge is passed on in future. Next slide, please. So we've marked this week as Traditional Skills Week, and hopefully you've seen some of our posts across social media where we've been highlighting the importance of maintaining the type of training that Shtp has delivered. We're also trying to gauge the extent to which this project and other training initiatives have fulfilled the sector need. Before Shtp, there were no funded routes into our specialist sector. Now other opportunities have begun to appear, and some of those we're going to hear about today. So from this session, we would like to get a sense of other existing training routes, how easy it is to access and set yourself up as a training organisation, and the level of support that the sector needs in this area moving forwards. Next slide, please. And so now it's time to hear from our panel members and to learn about their experiences working with trainees in an operational setting. First up, I'm delighted to welcome Roger Crompton. Roger is the trustee and secretary of Pilgrim Heritage Sailing Foundation, which operates Pilgrim, a Brixton trawler on the National Historic Fleet. And this year, the foundation hosted a short placement for one of our SHTP trainees and have subsequently offered her a full-time role. And it's also taken part in the government-funded Kickstart Scheme. So over to you, Roger.
Well, thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. My colleagues and I have I guess it's the privilege of being responsible for the maintenance and operation and conservation of this delightful national asset we have, and she's in fine fettle. Next slide, please. Okay, just 2 slides give a very quick context to what I'm going to be talking about. So Pilgrim is an 1895 chartered Brixton sailing trawler. She was fully restored about 10 years ago. We have an employed professional skipper and a seasonal mate cook. Everything else in the organisation is done by volunteers, including the rest of the crew. We operate very intensively from April to October each year. More than 50 passages, some of them up to a week or 2 weeks. And then we do refit work from November through to March. And as most of you will know, we sail the southwest coast of England and northwest France. About 90% of our income comes from selling sailing berths, which, as you can imagine, was a challenge last year where we didn't do any residential sailing. And we've been helped through last year by the Lottery Fund, the Culture Recovery Fund, the DCMS, and so on. So that's sort of who we are. Next slide, please. Okay, the challenge we face is, like many of you, I suspect, just simply surviving. Seems to be ever more challenging, and over the last 2 years has been immensely challenging. But not only do we have to protect and conserve the vessel, we also have to stay operational, and the difference between a static vessel and an operational vessel, as some of you will realize, is a big challenge, and particularly over the last 2 years, staying operational has been a real effort, and particularly because of our compliance obligations. And we have that inevitable conundrum between doing maintenance and conservation. Often what we need to do for maintenance is not always in line with what we need to do for conservation, and getting that balance right is always a challenge. And the other big challenge we have is maintaining the volunteer pool that we need to operate the vessel. And that's not just in terms of crew and maintenance, but it's in terms of running the whole organization. And that's been particularly challenging over the last couple of years, which I'll come to in a moment. And also meeting the expectations of others. And what I mean by that is when you're trying to survive and trying to stay operational, meeting the expectations of our funders and our charity obligations in terms of public engagement, education, diversity, inclusion, and so on, is particularly challenging. And you'll see more of that in a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got, moving on to training now, we've got training activities really in 3 areas. One is we need to continuously recruit and train volunteer crew to enable us to sustain ourselves at sea from April till October. And that's demanding in terms of the pool of volunteer crew we need. We also need to do training in terms of the skills we need to maintain and conserve the vessel. And we also need to do training for volunteers who are involved in marketing, in administration, in dealing with customer reservations, compliance, and all sorts of other issues. So those are our sort of immediate 3 training needs. They are challenged really heavily by the demographic reality of where we are, the economic reality of not having funding to support that training, and also the labour market reality in that there isn't really a ready pool of people available for training in the area. And so when you perm those three challenges against the need to deliver training, it proves quite difficult. In terms of delivering training, we like to think if we're going to deliver training, we deliver it to a high standard, and therefore having the right training methods and putting in place the right kind of training schemes that have positive outcomes and timely outcomes is difficult for us when we only have one full-time employee and everything else is done by volunteers. And supervising and managing training in a situation where you're doing most of that by volunteers is difficult. If you've got a volunteer who comes along every Thursday from 9 to 11, fitting that into a training routine or a training regime where you've got trainees coming along every morning and needed to be put into a training sequence, that's difficult. And also managing the outcomes, because if we set off down a scheme of 6 months or 3 months or a series of courses, making sure that we get everyone there, that we get them up to the right standard, we get them through the assessment at the end is a particular challenge, because you may set out with the best of ideals or the best of objectives and ambitions, but seeing them right through to the end and coming out the other end is something that for a small organization, primarily volunteer-led, is something that we strive to achieve but find difficult from time to time. At the current time, we have 3 training initiatives underway. We have our volunteer crew training, where we're just starting to train crew now for the 2022 season. Each year we start off with a pool of volunteer crew, usually of the order of 20 or 25 people. By the time we get to the end of the season, that number always reduces because people move on, or they don't take to it, or they've got other interests, or they're finding it too difficult. And so each year we have to refresh that group. We've had the privilege of having a placement from the Shtp 2 program this season. And what's been interesting for us about that is I honestly think we've probably learned as much from the trainee as we've been able to give to the trainee. So that's been a real mutual activity where we've found that really refreshing. The other thing we've been doing is we've been running a Kickstart trainee scheme, and that's been really interesting, really valuable to us, but has posed us some significant hurdles that we've needed to get through, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. So next slide, please. Okay, for those of you who don't know the Kickstart scheme, it's a government-run scheme for 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit and at risk of long-term unemployment. And what the government does is pays 100% of their cost for 25 hours a week for 6 months, and you get a grant of £1,500 to cover their initial employment and their training costs. Now, you can't apply for Kickstart applicants if you don't have 30 vacancies. 30 vacancies is a bit of a stretch for us when we wanted 1 or 2. So you have to find a partner. We found a gateway partner, they're called, and we had one locally in what was called the Torbay Development Agency. And so we approached them and they were happy to work with us. Whatever else you learn about Kickstart is it takes time. It takes an enormous amount of time to get through the bureaucracy associated with the scheme. The Chancellor announced the scheme in September 2020, and we applied for 2 trainees within 2 weeks of the announcement. Those 2 vacancies were for trainee boat fitters to help us through the winter refit. Those 2 posts were approved in late February 2021. And so we were nearing the end of our refit when the posts were approved. And that was not through any delay on our part, that was just through the bureaucracy of the scheme and the applicants, the posts approved by the Department of Work and Pensions and getting them activated and so on. So that put us in a difficult position because we had to convert those trainees to seasonal crew because we support a boat 24 hours a week trainee through the sailing season. The other challenge we had is that recruitment is not under our control, that the DWP have to put candidates who fit the criteria. You can't go out and just recruit them, interview them. Now, you can work in parallel with the job centre, and they were very helpful with us. So we can identify someone and put them forward. They assess if they meet the criteria, and then they approve them for consideration. And so that was a bit unwieldy, but we were lucky that our local partners were very helpful and very positive with that. The other thing that was interesting is you get this grant of £1,500 for each candidate. And you can use that for things like protective clothing and training. But you need to be really careful, because we were going to use that to deliver training by our skipper and our volunteers and set that training cost against the grant. We found we couldn't do that because our skipper was being funded by the Culture Recovery Fund, and you're not allowed to have two sources of Crown funding for the same cost. So that made that ineligible. And because our volunteers, who some of them are very well qualified to undertake this training, they're not a cost to the organisation. You can't set the lack of cost against the grant, and therefore we found that particularly difficult. It's a small amount of money, relatively speaking, but it's still important to us. And so we've had to be quite imaginative about using the grant. We've had to resource external training, which we wouldn't necessarily have done. Does the scheme work? It's certainly worked for Pilgrim. We've been really pleased with it, and despite the negative issues I've tabled, they're practical issues. Once you get through them, we've had Kickstart crew this season, which have been invaluable in getting us through the season, and so we put in for another placement in August for this time for a trainee boat fitter through the winter refit season. That was actually approved yesterday. So that shows you 1st of August to beginning of October. So we're now frantically recruiting to try and find someone to start with us in November to help us through our winter refit. Next slide, please. Okay, the other areas that we haven't pursued, but we want to, the issue of apprenticeships. And the difficulty we have is the issues I raised earlier about our ability to manage and supervise those. And also, we haven't yet convinced ourselves there is the right apprenticeship accredited program that fits our needs. The nearest ones are the boat building one and the marine engineering one, but they don't fit our needs very well. And also, you've got to find the right provider to work with, the right technical college or whatever to work with. So we have not yet embarked on an apprenticeship. We want to, but we're finding the supervision environment challenging, finding the right program challenging. And also, because we sail from April till October and the vessel's away a lot of that time, it's difficult to run an apprenticeship through that summer season. In terms of our volunteer training, and the final point I wanted to make was that recruiting and inducting volunteers is a really important part of what we do. And there's always a difficulty between volunteers who do and volunteers who train. And most of our volunteers are happy to do, but they're less inclined to train, or we have to really lead them carefully to undertake training and then make sure that fits in with the training scheme we've got. Matching that volunteer availability to when you want to do the training is a challenge. And also retaining and motivating volunteers. I think the pandemic has been a big challenge for us because we rely on the fact that we have a big pool of volunteers who are regularly working on the vessel and engaging with us. Well, clearly we lost that momentum for almost a year because people were shielding or in lockdown or had other family priorities or whatever. And we're just about at this moment in time trying to re-energize our volunteer program. We struggle with our obligations in terms of diversity and inclusion. We have as many organizations like ours do, we have a senior oriented volunteer pool. We had a eureka moment last week where we had our first sailing induction for crew for next year. We had 5 on that program, and 3 of them were female. 1 was 19, 1 was 25, and 1 was in their 40s. And that might sound a very small achievement to some of you. For us, that was an absolute thrill. So we are making stride, we are trying to do training, but it's really difficult. And the pandemic has been all about surviving, and now we put more stimulus and energy into our training program. Hannah.
Oh, thanks very much, Roger. That was really interesting, fascinating to hear, you know, about your work with volunteers and how you can, you know, how you're encouraging them to start training the trainees. That's a really interesting aspect, which I'd love to explore a bit more in the Q&A in due course. Interesting also your experience with the Kickstart scheme, which sounds like a bit of a minefield, but but obviously with some good outcomes as well. Yep. So yeah, please post any questions that you may have for Roger in the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we will come to those in due course after all our speakers have presented. But for now, I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So if we could go to the next slide. Thanks, Cara. So our next speaker is Barbara Bridgeman. Barbara is director of the Liner River Barge CIC, which is one of our ship-shaped network hubs in the southwest. And Barbara and her husband Dominic have hosted all of our SHTP2 trainees during their induction period. They also run short courses afloat and ashore, and I believe have had a recent experience with the Kickstart scheme as well. So I'll hand over to Barbara now to tell us a bit more.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. Yes, I represent Liner CIC, which is a community interest company. We took Liner on in 2016-17, and Dominic and I have been sail training instructors for many years. So we have experience working for a number of charities. We have experienced a number of different types of traineeships, inductions, apprenticeships. And it's interesting to be able to talk about the current situation now. Next slide, please. So for what concerns us, and probably that's why some of my colleagues here have never met me, is because since we operate Liner, we are bound to the code of conduct of operation, which is within the inland waterways scenario. So Liner is a tema sailing barge, originally built in 1896. And she was built as an inland waterways cargo working boat, and all her trade was to transport cargoes of produce or stones on the Tema tributaries and north of the break, or the Plymouth breakwater. So for what concerns Liner's operation, is slightly different from a sea-going vessel. Her vital statistics include a draft of 4 feet and a beam of 18 foot, and her tonnage is close to 50 tons. So it's like sailing a 50-ton dinghy without tugboat, basically. It is a very strange type of operation, and however, it might seem the restricted areas, the challenges that we face for what concern the expertise of the crew that we need on board are very high. So we move to the next slide, please. So nowadays we don't carry cargo like 125 years ago, but we carry people. They are our income, and the only way we have to support our operation through the charter of the vessel. As a community interest company, we try to give back with any surplus that we raise to the education of the community on the waterways. Only these years we've run, we've had near to 1,000 young people and children aboard Liner learning about from traditional skills, mechanical advantage to renewable energy. We are really passionate about what we do. However, we don't have we are not a trust. We don't have we don't have reserves, to be honest with you. We are just running out of our own income, which makes the operation extremely, you know, down to the bone, and every decision has to be taken for survival. We very often have to rely on volunteers, and our volunteers are wonderful. We have a pool of them that go from the basic skills to expert skills. But however, volunteers are not always around when they're needed. So for the type of operation the liner is, we need a very competent skipper who can constantly, you know, navigate in restricted waters, taking into account that however actually well liner sails for a gaff rig, the leeway that she carries, it's enormous. So we have to take decisions a mile or two ahead, because there will be no way to undo that decision or to avoid a mistake or error, or make it better somehow. So for us, it's really important that the skipper is a very competent person. The mate as well, of course, has to be extremely competent, but because we work always with the public, and we have guest boards, enjoying our weekend on the waterways in complete relaxation, our mate has to be somebody very good hospitality and public communication, and really good looking after people, as well as being an expert traditional sailor. Then, of course, again, because of the nature of the operation, we provide quite a quality service aboard, with food that is cooked. You know, not only aboard, might be cooked at home before, but anyway, there's a great focus on local produce and a high quality of delicious meals that makes, you know, that makes everyone happy, the customer happy, and obviously there has to be an expertise there again by another crewmate, crew member, a bosun, somebody like that with silver spoon qualifications as well. So, you know, all in all, it's quite a serious operation for not even going out at sea, and which has to be also controlled by the office, by an operation manager that writes all the policies and makes sure that we're up to, that we respect all regular demands. But for what concerns risk assessment, health and safety, we pride ourselves to take a strong duty of care, and we actually judge ourselves towards a seafaring standard, not a river inland waterway standard. And also, of course, we need to sell the charters, have a sales and booking team ready to be able to sell liners, voyages to people as far and wide all over the country. So it is a demanding operation. Next slide, please. So this year has been quite interesting because from the pandemic and having no demand at all for voyages and bookings, suddenly as the reopening hit, we were absolutely swamped by demand, and have tried, like Roger at Pilgrim, to sign up to the Kickstart scheme, and had to suffer the whole bureaucracy of it, but without the successful outcome that Pilgrim had, because we had nobody in the end who wanted to be interviewed, wanted even to come to an interview. So there's been a complete lack of, there were few people interested, but I think because the unemployment office is trying to get them to sign up. But then when I contacted them, they were not at all interested in coming for an interview or to have a career on a boat. So we have relied hugely on our volunteers that have been wonderful. But of course, most of our volunteers, they also have their own life, and above all during the summer holiday, they have families to look after. So we ended up delivering all of the summer work, just Dominic and I and our 2 children, who have been absolutely brilliant, and it's been a fantastic learning curve for our own children, who are 11 and 15. However, that's not exactly how we would like to run the operation in the future. So we need to create a pool of expert people that are able to come to our aid when it's needed. And for us, obviously, as well as the fact that Liner is actually starting to trade basically from this year, is to settle the operation that has just started, because in the past 4 years we have slowly rebuilt Liner together with our community and with the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund and many other funders. So it just so happened that this year was the first year where Liner was fully ready and fully restored to deliver some type of serious charter work that supports everything else. And the only help that we found was through a couple of ex-trainees from the SHTP 1 and 2 scheme. So that was wonderful to have a little bit of help, and also to talk to them and understand what is going on in the industry, really. Why is there a shortage of skills? Next slide, please. So, you know, when you look at the SHTP's schemes 1 and 2, they've been very successful. National Historic has proved that there is a need in the industry, there is a shortage of skills. And why, apart from National Historic, there hasn't been any other scheme put on in the past few years? I remember before had there been schemes like Ocean Youth Club, which my husband Dominic did, and I know plenty of people who've done Ocean Youth Club, and they still are well into boats even decades after. So definitely Ocean Youth Club was a scheme that was working and working well, and that's gone. Then I remember the Astor having the skippership scheme. I used to take young skippers from that scheme and then get them into the sail training and get them to progress to bigger vessels. And that's gone as well. Really, before in the Southwest, there were a number of organizations that would be able to give that opportunity, that entry level to young people or career changers who wanted to get in the industry, even if the wages weren't great, but it was an access, it was an opening there towards learning the skills and having that work experience that will bring you along to be referred to other organizations or find other work. So before there were those type of organizations around that. At the moment that they're not anymore. One, for instance, the last charity we worked for went bankrupt and they shut down, and that was an entry level, for instance, for a lot of people who trained with us. It is becoming really difficult. There is a lack of support in the sector for what concern finance and training. Therefore, nowadays, people who are not in the industry don't even know this industry exists or that it's possible to get into it. But we know from the SHTP2 scheme that with good recruitment, it's possible to get new people of all ages and ability. We shouldn't be restricted just to young people, career changers, anybody who wants to get into boats should have a way to do it. Next slide, please. So makes you, think for the sustainability, for the future of the industry, what are we looking at here? In the Southwest, when I was in need of help, it was really hard to find people who were free, because all the good people, all the people that have the expertise, they are employed by other organizations. But if we are so small that we cannot employ in the long term a number of staff, but we have to rely on freelance work, how do we do that? I think it's possible to do it, because we have to be realistic. The finances of this sector, they're not great. We do this for vocation, for passion. We get a kick out of opening the access of this for the public onto historic boats, and get people to love historic boats and feel a passion. But when it's down to paying wages, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. We personally, I cannot afford to pay 5 or 6 people's wages, but I can afford to give work to freelance people who will gain a lot of experience and would be well paid for the work they do, but not necessarily being a long-term employment. Nowadays, it's we have to be really realistic. It's a new era. The world, you know, everything, the whole employment world is shifting around. And at least for what concerns the Southwest, I cannot speak for other parts of the country, but in the Southwest, there's a lot of people that are quite happily doing building in the winter and sailing in the summer, and they have a different type of income, and they're really happy to be freelance because it gives them the freedom of movement that others that a long-term employment won't have. So it's possible, but we need to train, we need to include, to open the access and get more new people into the industry, or the industry will dwindle more and more. So we are thinking, for what concerns NHS-UK and our expertise, it's to train. And we have all the qualification and the training center to provide the service that we could help also. NHS-UK could train a pool of people that would be shared amongst all of the Southwest organizations, so that could help Pilgrim or could help others, but with the quality of training that is necessary, that is required, be it a volunteer, be it a trainee. I think it's really impossible to find anything else that fits our industry, because there isn't out there a formal body that has given us the opportunity to just get off the shelf the apprenticeship that we want, or the volunteer training that we want. We have to design it ourselves. That's the only way to get what you need, because the boats that we operate are very niche, they're very specialized, and they need that expert skill. And I see a lot of benefits as well in getting a training scheme locally for the Southwest area. First of all, the pandemic is still on, hasn't stopped. And traveling, transport has always been a problem anyhow. So having a scheme that is very localized will support trainees with their accommodation and transport, and would expose them to a great number of varied projects, because there's quite a lot of micro organization or micro projects, grassroots projects going on in the whole of the Southwest that are very, very interesting. And it's all to do with knowing the projects and the people. And as a Southwest ship-shape hub, NHS-UK definitely knows a lot of projects and a lot of people, and would be really, really happy to coordinate exchanges and work experiences. And then that would mean that the organizations would benefit from the pool of trainees at different levels. So if you need a refitter for the winter, would be somebody that would be different from the person the expert mate that you need in the summer. But there's a place for everybody. And interestingly, I have a number of volunteers, they don't want to come sailing. They just want to do refit work in the winter. So it's really important to be able to give a space to all the different type of talents and work, interest that people have. we need to open our mind to the fact that there's not just us as sailors and the pride of our what we do. People might like to join in for different reasons, and it's important to be as inclusive as possible, really, because it's by getting that variety of new people in the industry that actually we're going to sustain the industry itself. And also giving these people, like National Historic Ship has proved with the Shtp schemes, that an opportunity to career change and get into, and have the qualifications to actually enter the industry and being employed and work in the industry in a number of ways. Next slide, please. So if ever there was the opportunity as a hub for us to get together with a number of other Southwest organizations, I would gladly invite you all over to Cremo, to our workshop and premises here, the gymnasium, and discuss how best we would design a scheme that fit as the local need of the area. And of course, we can deliver. We have the classroom and we have the facilities. We have the experience to train and deliver the training that is needed. But it has to be something in coordination with everyone's needs. So we will have to have a consultation on this. But I also think that it's really important to create a localized model that share best practice, sorry, and reflects onto and communicate with others, with other organizations in other sector, other parts of the countries, so that we can compare and compare models and understand what works best for different organizations in different parts of the countries, and share ideas and exchange of trainees as well, to give them the opportunity to go and have a view on a different part of the country and how training is delivered over there. So in my opinion, what National Historic Ship has done with the SHTP schemes is to create the opportunity and the legacy for others to take it on in a different way, to respond to the needs of the local industry, because at this time of where we're still in the pandemic, I think it's really important that we get together in our local area and understand what we can do to support each other in a small geographical area, and then share our experience with the rest of the nation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barbara. I think that was a really thought-provoking presentation. And yeah, there's lots of things we can pick up there in the question and answer session at the end. So do post your questions for Barbara in the chat. And I think in particular, it'd be interesting to talk about that idea of a localized training solution. One of the things we've learned through SHTP is to focus on, those different regions around the country, and a lot of the issues are obviously the same, but also there are some particular sort of nuances to the different areas as well. So I think that would be something that would be very interesting to discuss further. However, now I'd like to move on, please, to the final member of our panel. So that's Felicity Lees, who's the Operations Manager at Pioneer Sailing Trust. And Pioneer has been one of our operational vessel partners from SHTP2 and have hosted a number of training placements for us over the last couple of years, also employing one of our latest graduates as a bosun this season. And I know that the Trust is also working to offer apprenticeships in boat building and heritage marine. So really keen to hear a bit more about that from Felicity. Thanks very much, Felicity.
Thank you. I just wanted to start by just giving a little bit of background into what we do and where we're going to go next as well. So next slide, please. So I just thought I'd start with this. This is Pioneer when it was found in the mud. So there was a dream by the trustees that they should rescue this Skillinger smack because it was very special historically, and there wasn't any sort of examples of this sort of boat sailing. So that was the dream. Next slide, please. They actually rescued it out of the mud, and believe it or not, this was the best example that they found, and that they restored it at a local farm. And what they noticed when they were restoring the boat is that there wasn't much opportunity for young people to get into the industry. So they had several boat builders, so there are 2 boat builders, plus some other people with some skills, and they brought some young people in as well to sort of learn. And after sort of several years of the restoration, it was up and running as a sail training vessel. So next slide, please, Cara. What we do now is we take lots of different people from the area sailing. That's been a really sort of successful initiative, and it runs pretty smoothly at the moment. We are quite targeted to the sorts of groups that we take. We take lots of young people from the area, up to sort of 1,000 young people plus some adult groups. So we're working about 125 days in the season. And what we get through that is lots of people who then have an interest in working in the industry, or it sort of sparks their interest. So in 2010, the building in Brightlingsea was finished, and that is the boatyard that we have now. And it was then decided that we would start an apprenticeship here, or be the base for an apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So through the years, we've run different sorts of apprenticeships in different ways. Sometimes we've been partnered with colleges, sometimes we've been partnered with providers. The current apprenticeship is a 4-year apprenticeship, and it's in boat building. And it is run by, it takes place here, and it's run through a training provider. And it is in boat building, and boat building has the City and Guilds framework within it. So that's how a lot of the boat building apprenticeships or traineeships or City and Guilds courses have got that same sort of structure. That's the current apprenticeship that's been running here. And I'd just like to say that apprenticeships have been an amazing sort of part of what we do, and a big part of helping us to actually restore all sorts of different boats through the different projects. Without the apprenticeships, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done and achieve what we have. Some of the projects that we have at the yard are funded projects through Heritage Fund. Some of them are commercial projects, and the apprentices get involved with all of those projects. Next slide, please. This is just one of the projects that we had through the Heritage Fund. This is a 1970s Trinity House launch, which we restored. There was a lot more restoration than first thought, and so pretty much a new boat. Next slide, please. As you'll see, there are apprentices. So we had 8 apprentices that were actually employed here at the time, and we had another 10 that were from different employers around Essex. And the way it worked was we had our apprentices full time, and we had the apprentices coming in for a day a week from the other employers. That's slightly changed now, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to run it in the future in a little bit. So that's Trinity. With this project, start to finish, they learn a bit about the history. They also learn, as the boat is being built, each element and how they work together. They have to understand the drawings, they have to understand a bit about the engine installation, and obviously they want to learn a little bit how to operate it as well. So we've been through this project learning lots of sort of things along the way. And if we go to the next project, next slide, sorry. This is and the other project that we had in the Heritage Fund. This was Priscilla, which we now operate. So that's how it was when it was found and rescued. And what we had to do with this, and before it was moved, we had to build that frame that you can see before it's transported. Next slide, please. And what it had was an encased in concrete. So as the concrete was taken off it, and that's in our yard now, the whole thing sort of collapsed. But what was interesting is the way that it was done, the process of restoration, the understanding of the history and the heritage behind the boat, and how the boat was going to be restored back to the original condition. So next slide, please. So the apprentices, they learn all of these processes from start to finish, and all those key elements that go alongside with not only the boat building apprenticeship, but also the historical side of it. Next slide, please. So this was a 3-year project with Trinity, and so we had Trinity and Priscilla built in 3 years with our 8 apprentices plus the outside apprentices. So next slide, please. And there they are launching Priscilla, which is now used alongside Pioneer, which is sailed through the season. The reason I'm just showing some of these, the boats and the restoration of them, is we've learned a lot through the boat building apprenticeship, and how we might like to change the apprenticeship to suit a bit more what we do. And that's why we're sort of looking to another route of apprenticeships. Next slide, please. The other part of the apprenticeships, one of the big parts of the apprenticeships, is the rowing gigs that we build. So with the boat building apprenticeship, there is a standard framework which every apprentice has to go through. They have to learn how to make the backbone, they have to learn how to fit out the boat, paint the boat, all the things that go into the boat and externally as well. So we designed a project that would include all of these learning parts, plus the other projects like Trinity and Priscilla. So they get a big mix of learning. Next slide, please. That's just showing you the fit out. And because these gigs are sold and they are they're racing boats, they have to be a very good standard. So they've all got to weigh roughly the same, look the same, have the same shape. So the apprenticeship is of a really high quality, and that's what we really want to push. That anyone that comes out of here has had a really good range of learning experience and to a really high quality. So any apprentice that's leaving here, we're sort of confident that they are as prepared as possible for employment. Next slide, please. So this is one of the rowing gigs just before it's painted, and you can see that the sort of quality of the workmanship there. Next slide. And these are the first 2 that we built, Velocity and Vandawara. named after first class skin and smacks, if any of you noticed that. And there is now a league. There's 24 rowing boats out there that we built, and they're designed from the East Coast beach boat. So that's been a great little project for us as a framework to make sure that we are covering everything that the apprentices need in terms of their sitting guilds, and also providing a product at the end which is then sold to the communities, and has created a new sport in our area. So next slide, please. And this is just an example of the gigs on a race day. So there's now, as I say, there's now 24, so it's double that almost. So it's quite a spectacle, and it's sort of our part of putting back into the community. A few years ago, we also decided that we would change the gigs slightly to build them from composite. Next slide, please. So the composite gigs are now fiberglass with a wooden fit out. There's two reasons really. One is so the apprentices get to understand the use of composites, because what we found with just solely wooden boats is some of the best apprentices that were here found it quite difficult to get employment because they didn't have the understanding of fiberglass, and there's just a lot more employment with fiberglass, and so the knowledge of that is sort of key. So we now have the composite rowing boats alongside the wooden ones, and also there's big advantages for the rowing clubs. They're just a lot easier to maintain and keep, and they've also got buoyancy inside, which means they can be self-rescued if they were to capsize, which is a bit of an advantage. Next slide, please. Now just going on to current projects and what we've got in the future. We've got Lady Nancy, which is slightly different from the working boats that we have previously done projects on. This is actually a commercial project, and this project is something that we are doing with the apprentices. They learn little bits of planking at the moment, and all sorts that go into that project. Next slide, please. This is one of our apprentices on the project, and it's been really technical. So this is then taking out the cast iron keel, replacing it with a lead keel, so it's completely different shape, and that had to be redesigned and put back. Next slide, please. And then they also were involved in the floors, which are made from cast bronze, which is all part of the learning for their apprenticeship. They learn the pattern making, they learn how to send things off to get cast, they learn a bit about the design. Next slide, please. And it's actually a bit further on than this now, but that's the sort of thing that we've got on in the yard at the moment. And so with apprenticeships, as I said before, we have been running the boat building apprenticeship, which is based on the City and Guilds framework. But what we're deciding to do is move to the Heritage Engineering Technician Apprenticeship. And the basis for this is we've looked at what that provides and what the boat building apprenticeship provides, and it's much more natural in what we do. So the Heritage Engineering Technician, the main differences are the fact that they have to understand a bit about the history. They have to understand a bit about how to research the history, how to make sure that you're going to go down the right route when you are rebuilding or restoring or conserving a boat, which is something that we can show through our case studies, and obviously the working case studies of Priscilla and Pioneer and Trinity, they're all there. They also learn quite a bit about the engineering involved. So there is, I'd say a quarter of it is engineering based. So they're learning about engines, installation, inboards, outboards. They're also learning a bit about electric propulsion. They learn a bit about steam as well. They learn about operation of the boats as well, a little bit of operational knowledge. They learn about how to stabilize a vessel, make it safe. So all of those elements are things that we've done before, and they fit within what we're naturally going to do. The other sort of main advantage is the apprentice comes out with a much broader understanding of boat building. So it's not just about the main fabric of the boat, it's also about everything that goes into the boat, working safely as well, and a bit of operation. And the hope is that sort of broader understanding is much more advantageous to apprentices once they've sort of go through their training and their next step. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to work with a new provider. They are the Heritage Skills Academy, and they are located in Bicester. And they currently run the Heritage Engineering Technician in motor vehicle, and that's been really popular and really successful. So they act as the provider, and we deliver the course. We are going to run it a little bit different from the way we've run it before, in terms of how much time is spent here. So the course generally is going to be split into 9 blocks of learning. So in the year they'll do 9 weeks. 6 of them is actually on the boat building side, and then the rest of the weeks will be on the engineering side. So we've got 32 blocks in total over the 3.5 to 4 years that an apprentice is with us. The reason we've done it like this is we want to be able to appeal nationally. So people can come from all over the UK, hopefully, to be with us for a week. It might even be that we increase the blocks, so it might be 2-week blocks. We're kind of working that out now, so it becomes more accessible, so trainee apprentices can come here for a little bit longer and have some sort of more intense training. I didn't want to go in too much detail about the apprenticeship because it can be a bit confusing, but if you want to know a bit more and a bit more detail, I'm really happy to talk to you about that, how to get an apprentice, what we offer and when, the Heritage Skills Academy's role, which is to do with recruitment, making sure that the employer is led through the recruitment, so you're getting the right apprentices and the right level of support to help the business. And also there is some funding at the moment for apprenticeships. I'm never sure how long this will last, but at the moment, if you employ a 16 to 18-year-old, you can get up to £4,000 from the government. 19 plus, you can get £3,000 for that for the first year. So again, I can talk to you a bit more in detail if you were interested in that. And just to sort of go on from here, next slide, please. Just to show you some of our sort of alumni. This is Abby. She's just started her own business actually, which is up in Norfolk, and she was with us a few years ago on the boat building apprenticeship. And then next slide, please. And then we've got Tom as well. He's just left us, and he's got his own boat building business as well, and he also does crewing and all sorts. So just a little bit of a insight into what we do and why and how you can get involved. And yeah, if you want to ask any questions or get some more detailed information, I can send that to you. So that's it, thanks.
Thanks very much, Felicity. And that was really interesting to hear a bit more about the apprenticeship programs you've been offering at Pioneer and the projects your trainees have worked on. And I'm sure that there's going to be people who will take you up on that offer to hear a little bit more about it, possibly even outside of this forum, because I think that experience that Pioneer Sailing have had, you know, actually working through the details of the apprenticeship framework is really invaluable and something that is really good of you to share. I'd also like to say a big thank you to all of our 3 panel members for sharing your experiences with us. And it's been fascinating hearing about your work and the different ways that you've integrated training into your daily operations. It's now time for the Q&A, so please feel free, anyone in the audience, to ask questions of our panel. Do post them on the chat. I can see we've had a couple coming through already, which is great to see. We're also going to allow people to turn their cameras and mics on and ask a question direct if you find that easier. So if you would like to do that, just feel free to turn your camera on, wave at us, and hopefully we'll spot you and give you that opportunity to ask a question of the presenters. Before then, I just wanted to start, based on some of the discussion that there's been on the chat already. I can see that people are really interested in this issue of recruitment, and certainly with SHTP, that was something that, you know, we had to work very hard on, devising a kind of recruitment technique and a program that would attract people into the scheme, and also just making sure that you know, the trainees we were getting through had the sort of basic skill set and passion and enthusiasm that we were looking for the program. And I think it's been interesting listening to each of our presenters, and each of you, I think, have alluded to recruitment at some stage, you know, whether even in Barbara's case, just the fact that nobody came through from the Kickstart program that was suitable. And also, Felicity, just interesting to hear a little bit about how you've recruited, you know, the large numbers of trainees that you've had on site doing the apprenticeship program. So I think my question really to all 3 presenters as a starter would be, you know, how difficult do you think that recruitment process is? You know, is it particularly hard to attract new people into a sector where we're looking to fill sort of identified skills gaps? And then obviously, what sort of people are you looking for? You know, who's your sort of target there? What skills are you looking for them to bring in? Are you very happy for it to be people with no previous experience, or what's their sort of profile? And how do you think you would recruit accordingly? Perhaps if we could go to Felicity first, because obviously you've been running that program, which presumably has dedicated recruitment alongside it.
Yeah, well, we've run recruitment in different ways. As I said before, we're having quite a lot of people that are connected to us through going on trips on Pioneer. So that's one way of naturally sort of getting people interested and then going on to sort of an apprenticeship. We've also got lots of connections with schools, and we do a lot of work experience with schools as well. That's another way that we've recruited. We've run different programs with the Apprentice Trust that are linked to the job centre. So that is another way that we've recruited. With this new apprenticeship, the Heritage Skills Academy, so the guys that are the provider, they are their responsibility is to help with the recruitment. So if employers sort of really have had no experience of that at all, they will help. That's part of their function within the apprenticeship. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Felicity. And Roger, I mean, going to you next, your experience, perhaps generally in recruiting people on board, but also through the Kickstart Scheme. I noticed you put something on the chat already mentioning speed dating. So it would be great to hear a bit about that.
Yes, well, it was interesting. It came up in the last couple of days that we went through the Kickstart recruitment process, as you heard earlier, some months ago. And that was a conventional, get them to fill in a form and send you a CV and so on. What the Job Centre here have just started is that if you have a Kickstart vacancy, the employer now has to go on a Kickstart fair, and they pay for each of the available applicants to travel there. And the applicants have to, on a speed dating basis, speak to each of the employers operating a Kickstart vacancy. We haven't done ours yet. It's next week, so it'll be interesting to see how it happens, how it works. I think the good thing for us is it means we get a chance to talk to everyone who's out there and motivate them and enthuse them about what we do, whereas otherwise you're doing it in a sort of sterile way where they have to take the initiative to contact you. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see. I think the problem with the Kickstart scheme is that they're dealing with the people who frankly are least employable, and therefore you've got to find a way to engage with them where if they're finding employment is difficult for them, you've got something that is of interest to them and that they're motivated to go forward. We'll see how it works out, but they're doing that next week. We're doing that next week. The other challenge we have with volunteer recruitment is that that tends to be oriented to seniors and people with hobby interests or retirement and so on. And the area we're finding most difficult is to recruit volunteers who are interested in the non-boat related activity, which is administration, reservations, marketing, social media, and all the other things that we need to roll week in, week out, year round to actually make the organization effective. And that's much more difficult looking for volunteers in that area. And I wish we could say we cracked it, but we haven't.
Yeah, no, I can see the challenge there, but absolutely essential roles nonetheless. And I mean, that speed dating thing, I'll be really keen to hear a little bit more about how that works. For SHTP, we definitely went down the same route of finding that in-person recruitment at an early stage was really useful. So we devised these at sea selection days where that people could apply. They would basically get that opportunity to come and spend a day on one of the vessels in the partnership and have a go. And I think from both sides, that was a really useful exercise because it meant that we could kind of review the applicants in a very informal atmosphere rather than, sat behind an interview panel. We were able to just observe them, how they interacted with people, how they responded to being at sea on a boat and how willing they were to kind of take on some of the tasks. So that was really useful from our point of view. And then I think from the point of view of the applicants, again, just that opportunity to experience what they were applying for and see if it was really for them. I think there were definitely a few at that point that maybe thought, actually, this isn't perhaps, what I wanted to do. It's not quite what I expected. Whereas other people were hugely passionate and, were desperate to go through the rest of the recruitment process. So I think that sort of early meeting point with somebody rather than having to go through all the sort of formal application, slightly sterile application process was certainly a really good thing from the SHTP programme. And Barbara, interested to hear from you on recruitment as well, and noting what you said about the lack of sort of applicants coming through on the Kickstart. And did you get a sense of why that was and why people weren't signing up?
I think, Hannah, personally, there is just nowadays is maybe the new generation that really doesn't, looks at boats, traditional boats, and sees only a lot of hard work. There isn't the transmission of the passion that it was a bit more part of the growing up in UK. The same for me in Italy. I grew up around boats. I've always been fascinated since I was a little girl, and there is that nowadays. It's really hard to get kids out of the bedrooms and the computers, and they find that environment daunting and challenging. That's just a general, view of how society is going. But obviously there are people out there that are cut off for this career. We just have to put the spotlight on them and have our recruitment campaigns a lot more focused to find them. Personally, I don't need anybody to be a yacht master or be an expert sailor when they come to us. I'd rather have somebody completely inexperienced and blank, but with loads and loads of passion and commitment, because that's all is needed. We can teach you everything else and progress you forward. We've done it with so many different schemes. Even with the Future Job Fund many years ago, 2 of my apprentices, we selected them from the unemployment office, and 2 of them stayed with us and a long-term apprenticeship up to level 3. And I even sent them to Harkin's Boatyard for a month youth exchange through National Historic Ship. They had a wonderful time. And they were completely inexperienced. Is really only down to passion, and it's about the fact that there isn't that interest in a small local area. Apart from volunteering, we have volunteers of any age, but we've decided now to move along with the Tamara Landscape Partnership, which is a big project, and they will, as an umbrella organization, try to get apprenticeship, Kickstart and training recruitment done on the whole of the Tama Valley and Plymouth Waterways area. Definitely, there's plenty of people that are out there and don't know what to do. They haven't even tried it. And as you say, in your experience, to put them on a boat and let them try is the first thing that one should do. And then straight away, if they have the commitment, the passion, they will find a way to carry on. So recruitment is vital, really. It's so important.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Barbara. And moving on, we've got another question here about funding and fundraising. And obviously funding is essential to making any of these things happen. And we've heard from our panel about the various funding that's been gone into these schemes. Obviously, SHTP was a National Lottery Heritage funded project. We've had the national schemes coming in, like the Kickstart and the Apprenticeship scheme. But I think it would be just interesting to hear a little bit more about that, and from you in terms of how essential you feel that financial backing is, and how it actually comes through to you as an organisation. I mean, from SHTP, most of the money that went into that scheme went directly to the trainees, and it was offered to them as bursary payments, or it came through to them in the form of courses, or training opportunities at other sites and masterclasses, things a lot of that nature. We were able, unfortunately, to give very little recompense to the host organisations that were hosting our trainees. And obviously they got added value from the scheme in terms of the partnership, the publicity, the opportunities that it brought, but in terms of sort of hard cash, it was relatively limited. So it'd be quite interesting just to hear a little bit from the three of you about how essential you feel that funding package is for the trainee, and also whether any of that does come through to you as an organisation. Felicity, from the apprenticeship side, could you come in there?
Yes, I think it is absolutely essential. And when I was talking about the bigger projects that we've been a part of, we've had quite a lot of backing from big funders like Heritage Lottery, and without that, we wouldn't have been able to employ so many. So when we haven't had those sorts of projects, we haven't employed as many apprenticeships, but we constantly seek funding all the time. That's part of my job, yeah, it's just that's kind of how it is at the moment. There there's lots of other things that I could talk about as well, but so I think it's always important to sort of keep seeking the funding. There is a commercial aspect to what we do, which that really helps as well. So we've got the commercial side of the boat building, but also our site here is part of the site is rented to the wind farm. So we're slightly luckier, or I suppose better off, because we're starting from a different place. But I think seeking funding is absolutely key on two sides. One is sort of the training and the boat building side, but also the actual operation of the vessels, and that is just ongoing. I wish I had an easier answer, but I don't.
And we've also, just on that note, we've got a question about who employs and pays the wages under the proposed higher education training, or are they on an under 18 on a grant? So could you just explain a little bit about that briefly?
So if you've got an employee who is an apprentice, the employee is responsible to pay the wages. The starting wage for an apprentice is £4.30 an hour. So that is something that the employer is going to have to find. After that, it goes to minimum wage for their age, which is sort of there's a scale of that. There is at the moment funding from the government. As I said, if they are under 19, you can get up to £4,000 for the first year. Over 19, it's 3,000. The boat building apprenticeship also has been quite. There's been a lot of employees that have been successful in the Worshipful Company of Shipwrights funding, and that is available for the first year of funding. I think that's up to £6,000 for the first year. So that's the funding that I know of at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Felicity. And then just coming on to Barbara there on the question of funding. Obviously, I know you'd gone down the Kickstart route. You'd also, as you mentioned previously, done the Future Jobs Fund, and just wondering again from your point of view, that balance between the funding that the trainee needs to receive and yourself as an organisation delivering that training. How essential is that funding?
Well, the funding is essential for a trainee. Yes, we at the moment, for instance, we have long-term volunteers that are slowly migrating as career changes into full-time sailors. And with volunteers, it's been a slow process. There hasn't been the issue of the funding, but in reality, when you have a time frame and an employee, when we had apprentices, for instance, if they didn't have the wages paid through a number of like the skill agency, or the Future Job Fund, the skills agency, there were a number of funders that supported the first 2 years. Then we kept them on longer, so we paid for it ourselves through our charity at the time. But if we didn't have that 2-year startup financial support for the apprentices, then we would have had to make a choice between paying our own wages or paying the apprentices ones. You see, because it's very hard when somebody is absolutely, above all if it's somebody of a young age just coming out of school, then needs a lot of supervision. It becomes a full-time job. And when you have like, at the time we were restoring half of Arklow, for instance, we had a lottery fund to support the expenses for restoring half of Arklow, but it would not support our wages. And we took apprentices on that luckily had some funding allocated for their wages. And still we were full-time supervising at time, going against the timetable and deadlines of the project. So it's a fine line to understand where, it's either you have a complete boat build inside a section for instance, like they have a hark, and so the boat building can become commercial, or it's the main avenue for the apprentice. But if we have to teach them to sail and become the skipper, yacht master, being really reliable as a professional sailor, then there is a different demands on your time as a supervisor, as a trainer, and at the same time as a project deliverer. So it can become too much. We were lucky because we had the outlet of the boatyard, so we could give those apprentices that wanted to be in the boatyard to stay with the boatyard. That wasn't a problem. But for smaller organization, it could be quite daunting. Unless you have funding, you have to make choices, and then never what you really want. You know, ideally, you will look after those apprentices, after those trainees, and give them everything they need. The priority is them. They are the one. They are the learners. They are the ones who they have to have the priority in the funding, so that they get all the qualification and all the expertise, experience that is needed to progress.
Yeah, no, thank you, Barbara. And yeah, some tough choices that, as you say, the smaller organisations definitely have to face. And I'm conscious, everybody, of the time now. We are coming up to our allotted end time, and I know some people probably need to move on. But I'd just like to allow us to overrun for 5 minutes because we did make a late start. So if I can put that question to Roger, just thinking about particularly the emphasis of volunteering, really, with Pilgrim as an organisation, Roger. So, you know, obviously there's a different balance there because potentially you don't have the paid staff, but I'm guessing also, therefore, you know, trainees that come in need to do so, bringing their own funding, essentially, to make it work.
Yes, I mean, frankly, if in terms of training young people either with Kickstart or apprenticeships and so on, unless that program is funded, we can't do it. It's just not practical for us. We're happy to have the help in terms of their endeavour. We're happy to provide them with tuition and guidance and so on. But every year our need to generate enough income to meet our outgoings is such that we couldn't fund that ourselves. So if that's not funded by one scheme or another, be it grant funding or be it through Kickstart or something similar, we couldn't do it. I think there's an interesting challenge that Barbara alluded to with our volunteers. Compliance, maritime compliance, is increasingly a burden for us. We understand the need for it, but therefore even the need to get our volunteer crew through things like their RYA exams, their sea survival and so on and so forth, is a challenge, because we don't just have 4 or 5 members of crew. We have a maximum of 5 crew in any sailing, but we do 50 sailings, which means we draw from a pool, and that pool all need to be put through their VHF, their sea survival, their maritime medicals and so on and so forth. And I think if they're volunteering and giving their time, it's almost unreasonable to expect the volunteers to finance that themselves. We're grateful for their endeavour, their commitment, their goodwill. And so we find even funding the training necessary for compliance is a challenge for us. But that's where our priority would be. It wouldn't be into funding skills training, not because of a lack of commitment or passion to it, purely for simple economic reasons, where at the end of the day we have to generate enough income to keep us sailing. Our job as the people conserving and protecting Pilgrim is to keep her sailing in the traditional manner, to show the art and the skill involved, and therefore that must be our priority.
Yeah, thanks very much, Roger. And perhaps on that note, somebody has put onto the question thread asking if anybody knows a good fundraiser. If anybody's got any suggestions on that one, please do post them into the chat. We've had some really interesting comments, observations and questions coming through on the chat, and I wish that we could spend a little bit longer on them, but we are out of time. However, what we're going to do is collate all the questions that we haven't managed to answer that have come through on the chat. We will ask our speakers for their feedback on those, and we'll put those responses into a summary document, which we can send out to everybody that's attended here today. So apologies if we didn't manage to get to you. we will send those responses around. And also, if you think of a burning question later that you wish you'd ask, do feel free to just drop us an email and we can put you in touch with the relevant speaker. Could I have the final slide, please, Cara? Thank you. I'm sure you'll all agree that it's been a really interesting session, and it feels like that discussion isn't finished yet. We will be holding our end of project networking day for SHTP next week. So for those of you attending, we can continue the dialogue there. We're also going to be publishing our evaluation report on our website next month. Also the recording from our diversity and inclusion forum, which we held earlier in the week. So please do keep an eye out for those if you're interested in learning a bit more. And as I mentioned at the start of the session, National Historic Ships is working on a training framework as part of its legacy for the SHTP projects. We'll be sharing the details of this in due course, and if it's something you'd like to hear more about, please do email us at the address on the screen. But for now, a big thank you again to all of our speakers. It's been wonderful hearing from you, and thank you for sharing so freely all your experiences about training in your organisations. Also, thank you to Victoria, our project manager, and Cara, our projects officer, for organising today's session and making sure it ran smoothly. And thank you all for attending. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.